So, Proverbs and Ruth. Proverbs and Ruth are um, the next books up that we've got. Authorship, typically, the vast majority of it anyway, is more likely done by Solomon. Thousands of Proverbs are credited to Solomon back in First Kings. Proverbs 1 through 9 is characterized as the Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel. 1 through 9 sort of functions as a grid to read 10 through 31. 1 also opens up as the Proverbs of Solomon. One, if you will, is sort of the interpretive grid, and the other one is sorry about that. It was a guy who's bringing cattle over to my pasture. he just he chimes in. So anyway, what was I saying? There are other proverbs written by other guys. Hezekiah and his men are credited with copying other proverbs that Solomon wrote, and a lot of people think maybe Hezekiah is also the one who actually compiled this book. He seems to have access to the vast sort of weight of Solomon's proverbs, and so more than likely the book itself was compiled by Hezekiah and his guys. The wise individual is the chokmah, probably a use of is kind of a cultural notion of wisdom, and there are a lot of parallels in Proverbs with the culture around it, and so the wisdom of Amenemope, instructions of Amenemope, another English translation of that book, closely parallels Proverbs. In fact, if I was reading the wisdom of Amenemope to you, you would not know in some places whether or not I was reading Proverbs or whether I was reading the Egyptian literature. So the literature itself sometimes is provided to us by, the literature itself is sometimes simply consistent with cultural and conventional ways to think about wisdom. Just like today, it's wise, no matter who you are, no matter if you fear the Lord or not, to only spend the amount of money that you actually have. And if you don't, you'll go into debt. And so that kind of thing is just wise all the way across, right? So there's a lot of the Proverbs that are very much like that. And this particular section, 22 through 24, who's written by the wise, it really reflects those cultural values, and we have this great analog in Amenemope to it. Agur, the son of Yakan, King Lemuel, also rather right. We don't know much about these guys other than what is said about them here. And chapter 31, you've got this excellent wife. This could be or may not be part of Lemuel's sayings, but it's certainly a very key part of the canonical shape of the book of Proverbs. You've got Lady Wisdom and Lady Folly. Really, what you've got in chapters 1 through 9 here is you've got the climax of 1 through 9 between Lady Wisdom and Lady Folly. The 1 through 9 itself is a series of instructions from a father to a son. This is kind of like royal homeschooling literature, the way a king crafts and recreates a kingly mind in the heart or in the mind of his son. And so he knows so what you've got between the father and the son and in the father's mind is the father's voice, which he echoes almost in every chapter in 1 through 9 to the son. Don't neglect my teachings. Don't neglect your mother's teachings. Let them be a garland, around you, that you hang around you. He says this over and over and over again, and understanding that his voice, though, is competed with. And so he's got competition. His competition are very powerful voices that are personified in the first 9 chapters with unchecked power. Come, let us lie and wait for innocent blood, and illicit sexuality. And so you've got the married woman who comes after the young son to try to get him to sleep with her. And you've got the father presenting these competing voices with all of the compellingness that they bring with them, but also providing what you never get when you're getting just the voices yourself. The father is giving the voices with their full compelling nature, as well as the end product of the voices, which is death on so many occasions. And so you get this really remarkable full-orbed sort of approach to wisdom and these competing voices. Now, as you move toward the end of this section, then you've got Lady Wisdom and Lady Folly, and these are sort of the embodiments, if you will, of these voices. And so, if you go to chapter 9, Wisdom has built her house. She has hewn her 7 pillars, slaughtered her beast, mixed her wine, also set her table. She has sent out her young women to call from the highest places in the town. It's very connected to the temple. Whoever is simple, let him turn in here. Real important to note that the focus of the Proverbs here is on the wise and on the simple. So the simple would be the young, right? Those whose moral warehouse is really not filled up yet. And so the wise are those whose moral warehouse is filled with good things, and they're shaped by those. Who's not the audience is the fool. The fool, actually, Proverbs are actually a dangerous thing in a fool's hands. And so the fool, whose moral warehouse is filled with really bad things, is not an audience for Proverbs, but it's the wise and the simple. And so Lady Wisdom calls for the simple in verse 6 of chapter 9. She says, leave your simple ways and live. Walk in the way of insight. But she's got a competitor, verse 13. Again, the father knows all the way through that there's competing voices out there. And so Wisdom's got a competitor. Woman folly is loud, verse 13 of chapter 9. She's seductive, but knows nothing. She sits at the door of her house. She takes a seat on the highest places of town. Again, very close to this place where only the temple would dwell. Calling to those who pass by, who are going straight on their way. Whoever is simple, let him turn in here. And him who lacks sense, she says, stolen water is sweet. Bread eaten in secret is pleasant. But he does, and the fact of the matter is that's true. But then the father says, again, just giving both sides, the beginning and the end of this process, he does not know that the dead are there, that her guests are in the depths of Sheol. So the idea, the father is a very, very brilliant guy. He's very, very wise, a very wise guy. I don't know how brilliant he is, I guess, intellectually, but very, very wise. Knows how to navigate life. Knows that foolishness and the voices that represent foolishness of unchecked power and illicit sexuality are extraordinarily powerful and are extraordinarily seductive, but they have an end. And the individual who's being seduced by those things doesn't see the end. They only see the beauty at the beginning. But the father knows the end and conveys that in his description. So it's a full-orbed perspective on life in that sense. There are more Proverbs of Solomon in 25 through 29, the sayings of Agur in 30, sayings of Lemuel. I think we've gone through this, if I'm not mistaken. The themes, fear of the Lord. So what is the fear of the Lord? So fear of the Lord is a correct, this is a clinical way to say it, so forgive me, but this is a correct assessment of God, a correct assessment of God that yields emotional response. So in Hebrew, in the Hebrew mindset, in the Old Testament mindset, you don't separate your brain from your feelings and things like that. The Old Testament sees a person holistically, and so you have a response, a genuine response. So, for example, my brother took my 2 nephews when they were kids canoeing. And while they're canoeing, they're down in the Tampa Bay area, and so while he's canoeing, they're going down this river, and on each side of the canoe, they see really large alligators, and alligators are easily the size of the canoe. And so this is like a 2 or 3 mile trek. My youngest nephew is terrified but thrilled all at the same time. My oldest nephew is a 12, 13-year-old at the time, and so he was pretty checked out, as most of them are at that age, and so as they neared the end of the trek, they could see the pier, guys on the pier, and there was a tree that had fallen into the water. So Mark navigated around the tree right underneath this other tree, and when he did, a snake, about a 5-foot snake, fell out of the tree into the boat right behind Mark in the backseat of the canoe. Mark leapt out of the canoe into the water. My youngest nephew went bananas and started screaming because he's seen all these alligators, through the water. Mark also my brother finally registered. Okay, there have been alligators in the water. I mean, I'll take my risk with the smaller mouthed reptile in the boat. And so he jumps back into the boat and begins trying to corral the snake. The snake is terrified, shoots through my brother's legs, crawls over my youngest nephew's legs, who now ratchets up his screaming to like stratospheric level, and then bites my older nephew. So this is sheer chaos at this point, just pandemonium. Mark finally pins the snake. They throw it out. Everybody in the boat is screaming. Josh, my oldest nephew, feels like he's surely going to die, and it's talking like some Vietnam vet, say, "Mom, tell Mom I love her," things. And my youngest nephew is all but in fetal position, just talking and mumbling to himself. So when they get to the pier, there's this big redneck type guy on the pier, and he says, "I noticed that there's a problem out there," and kind of thing, and says, "What was the problem?" And my brother said there was a snake in the boat. He's just still, Mark's still really shaken up by it. The guy says, "What did it look like?" And my brother said, explain it to him, and the guy got this look on his face, kind of a smile. He goes, "Oh, them is tasty." Yeah, so it's just a super weird, event for my brother. But when he was telling me about it after I got done, and recovered motor control, laughing about it, I thought, well, this is a good example of the fear of the Lord, right? So both individuals look at the snake, but they assess it in totally different ways. And because they assess it in different ways, they both have radically different responses to it. The guy on the pier looks at the snake. He doesn't see a threat at all. He sees an entree, right? And his response is one of desire. My brother, on the other hand, looks at the snake and he sees something dangerous, imposing, and daunting, and my nephew, I'm quite confident saw a dragon of some sort, in the boat, and so the beginning of wisdom begins with assessment, because what you assess, right, you typically follow up with emotions and things like this. So while the wisdom of Amenemope can provide Egyptians wise things to do, what they don't do, if in fact the God of Israel is really what he claims to be, is it doesn't make the Egyptian wise, because wisdom is doing all these things under the auspices of the reality of Yahweh. In the first 9 chapters, the king tells his son to live and work for justice and equity. This is what Proverbs generates. How does it generate that? The same way it generated it back in Genesis 18 for Abraham. It generates it by this assessment of God, walking in the ways of God, knowing who God is, and then responding to him in that sense. And so all the Proverbs are driven by this. We talked about Lady Wisdom and Folly. We've talked about the sun. Creation language. So in Proverbs, for example, Proverbs 8, there's quite a bit of creation language. Wisdom is patterned after the order of creation, so there's a connection. Adam and Eve in the fall, there's blessings and cursings, there's righteousness, there's evil, there's a mention of a garden and tree, and so there's all of this sort of creational sort of language. What's interesting also is that there's eschatological language, so the concept of God's Spirit being poured out, the idea of exile, and displacement is also mentioned in the Proverbs. And so keep your eyes open for all of those things as you're reading the book of Proverbs. Proverbs is one of my favorite books. It is absolutely amazing. I'll tell you a good tool that you might want to get is this. This is Trooper Longman's book on Proverbs, and the great thing about Longman's book is in the very back of the book, he's got a series of themes that emerge out of Proverbs, and he's got all of the verses compounded with some really good summaries. It's super, super helpful in understanding sort of the way that Proverbs looks at broader topics. Hope you enjoy that.